Well guys, here's the final video for this longboard build series. If you haven't seen the previous videos, the playlist link is in the description below. So, in this video I wet sand the gloss coat and do a wrap up on the build and give my impression on how this board rides. Alright, now that I got the fin box all sanded down, it's nice and flush, the leash plug and the vent plugs ground flat, now it's time to do the wet sanding, which I don't mind because it's not dusty at all. It's probably, out of all the sanding, I enjoy it the most. And it also is going to give you the best results. It's going to make the board just pop, it's going to make it all nice and smooth. You're going to get that high gloss finish if you follow through all the way to, like, I don't know, start at like 400 grit, work all the way up to 1200, and then hit it with polish. You can go higher than that, but I found 1200 is probably the good sweet spot. I have 400 grit on my sanding block right now. I have a spritzer of water, and I'm going to just work on the tail back here, and then I'm going to open up the future fin boxes afterwards. Ideally, the future fin boxes would be raised a little higher, and then when you sand or when you grind, when I was doing this, the single fin box back here, when I'm grinding that open or grinding that flush, you would do the same for the future fin boxes. I like to err on the side of caution and have them set a little bit deeper, so I'm going to have to take a Dremel and cut these open, or an X-Acto knife, and just cut these open and peel out the tape. Minor, and then I'll just sand and blend that in. The main reason is because the way the fin boxes are, the set screw or the grub screw, there's only maybe, like, I want to say just under 1/4 of an inch, might not even be that much, a small amount of material that holds the grub screw in place. And if you grind too much of that away, there's not as much strength for that grub screw to set in there. The tail section is where I'm going to start, and this is where I'm going to take my sanding pad and I'm going to sand so that I get a really nice hard edge back here. So I'm going to sand flat first, and then I'm going to sand around on the edge here. Oh, and I also forgot, when I first started learning how to wet sand, it was actually on cars. This is where else you would probably need to sand a clear coat of some sort in order to polish it. So this is exactly like finishing a car clear coat. Wet sanding doesn't mean just saturating this board with a ton of water and then you sanding. What it means is you just need a little bit of water just to get the surface wet, and all that does is it helps the sandpaper not be clogged. It keeps the material that you remove, in this case the epoxy, and it helps flush it away. Occasionally I wipe it down after I sand a little bit. Don't have so much water that your sanding block floats on top of the water and it just glides. You're not doing any cutting. The water is a lubricant, but in that case it's actually acting as a barrier between the surface of the surfboard and your sandpaper. So you just want a little bit of water like that I've spritzed, and then you just sand. You want to be able to hear it. You can hear it. And then you see it turns white, and we're removing material. So once we remove all those scratches, we're ready to move on to the next part of the board, and then once we do the whole board, we move on to the next grit. So in my case, I'm going from 400 to 600, and then from 600, 800, 1000, 1200 polish or compound. So this might not show up on camera, and I might have already covered this before, but right here where this transitions from the soft to the hard rail, I'm going to sand this 90, and then this I'm going to blend in. So when I did the piece of tape to mask off from the top and the bottom when I was doing the epoxy, so I got this seam here, so I'm going to blend that in. This here I'm going to sand to 90. Now, it might not show up on camera very well because it's white. You can kind of see here. All right, there we go. Nice transition into the hard rail. Here now I'm going to just finish up squaring up that edge and we'll get a nice sharp edge. It's already actually very nice now, very sharp. Next up, we're going to do 600 grit. Now, as you get finer and finer through the grits, it speeds up significantly. You only spend maybe like, I don't know, well this is a pretty big board, but probably maybe 10-15 minutes on each grit, because this is a really big board because it's almost 10 feet long. There's a lot of elbow grease and a lot of sanding. After 600, I don't think I'm going to bother to show you 800, 1000, and 1200. I'll just go probably straight to polishing because this is exactly the same steps all the way through. We're just removing the scratches from the previous grits. The sandpaper will start becoming really hard to push as you move through the finer grits as the surface is becoming smoother. A tip is to drag the sandpaper in one direction. You're going to notice that it gets really smooth and almost to the point where it's shiny. Well, actually it will be shiny. Anything after like 800 grit, it starts getting kind of shiny, really smooth. So I'm just going to sand the edges and polish. We're getting there, guys. So, polishing, last step. I like using this stuff here, Norton Liquid Ice. I've since switched to this. I used to use a Mother's or a Meguiar's clear coat polish, automotive polish. This is the same thing, it's automotive polish. The difference with this is, this stuff here is 3 polishes in one. It depends on the type of pad you use, how aggressive this cuts. Depending on where you are in the world, you might not have access to this stuff. But look for a good automotive clear coat polish or compound. Compound's more aggressive. I think compound comes before polish. Yeah, so just polish it just like how you would a car. If you don't have any experience polishing cars, well, you use compound to remove like oxidization. So basically that you would do that after you sand the board with like up to 1000 or 1200 grit compound, and then hit it with polish. Now this is a 3-stage system, and typically there's like a wool bonnet, I think like a maybe some other pad, and then a foam pad. So you go through these steps. Depending on the pad is how aggressive it cuts. The wool pad is the most aggressive, so I start with that. It equals out to about 1200 grit. And then I'm just going to go to stage 3, just a full foam pad because I don't have the intermediate pad. What else? Oh, and if you don't have a polisher like this, you could do it by hand. It'll just take a ton of elbow grease. Or you can use a random orbital sander. As I mentioned in some of my other videos, this is, if you're going to have one type of sander or polisher for working on a surfboard and you don't want to buy one of these, get a palm sander or a random orbital sander like this. You can get a pad that sticks on the bottom of this. So this is just a smaller version of this wool pad here. Sticks on the bottom of the sander, boom, polish. Really cost effective and will save you a ton of elbow grease. Let's get started. Oh, I need a spray bottle as well, just to wet down the pad when I apply this stuff. And then I just go up and down the board, hit it. Don't stay in one spot too long because you don't want to heat up any one area too much. Pretty simple. Check this out, I even 3D printed some fins to match the color of the board. I'm going with a theme of green, so figured get some PLA in green, print off a few fins. 2 side bites, and also a larger one, slightly larger. Well, the board is finished. Well, it's actually been finished for like 4 months now, but it actually takes, some time to, edit and get these videos out. First off, I'd like to thank Greenlight Surf Supply for supplying me with the blank for this build, so go check them out. My affiliate link is in the description below. I can highly recommend their EPS blanks. It's the first time I've used them. They seem nice and dense, solid, nice color, and also they'll custom cut it to any spec that you want, so that's really handy. And of course, I want to thank you guys for watching, liking, commenting on this build. This build went very smoothly for the most part. So let's go talk about some lessons learned. So let's take some time and talk about, well, lessons learned while building this performance longboard. So number one, I had an issue with the gloss coat having some little bits of undissolved paraffin in it from the additive F, causing some pitting, and I ended up sanding the gloss coat down and redoing it a second time. So technically that would be like 3 hot coats. I didn't show because it would make for a really long video, and that's not something that would be all that interesting to watch. So I too run into problems even though I'm teaching you guys. So I think I know what the issue was, and it's the additive F that I have that has the paraffin dissolved in it. I've had it for several years, and some of the xylene evaporated out of it, increasing the concentration of the paraffin. So at least that's what I think. So I picked up some xylene and added it back to the additive F, dissolving the paraffin, and oddly I was able to actually find xylene at Canadian Tire of all places. So that's like a kind of a hardware, I don't know, a little of everything store here in Canada. So hopefully, I think that solved the problem. Next lesson learned was the pinstripe. So the pinstripe on this, I did it in a green from acrylic paint, matches the board, looks awesome, came out great. But I had a few spots when I did the gloss coating where it fisheyed a little bit. So what I would do next time is I would let the acrylic paint really dry and cure and set up, and then wash it with soapy water instead of just wiping it down with distilled water, which is what I did. Next lesson learned, I learned a lot about tinting on this board. The tint job came out decent, but I'd like it to be a bit more even, but EPS foam is challenging in that respect. Eventually, I'm going to get my hands on some polyurethane blanks, but they are expensive and very hard to find here in Canada. So yeah, I'm still working on my tinting jobs. I know that my technique is good and my theory and everything, but it's just the EPS foam due to the beading and then the unevenness of it and how I sealed it. So although my seal job was quite good, but I still had some spots that were a little unlevel, hence a little bit of blotchiness. But overall, came out great. The next lesson learned is the fiberglass I used for around the tail patch area. Next time I would make sure that it was from the same roll so I don't get the coloring issue that I had. And I would also cut it so that was more of an angle that you see on some surfboards. Instead of what I did was just go straight across, which is kind of boring. But I was expecting it to blend in with the rest of the board so it would be completely transparent. Anyways, oh well. So, and the last lesson learned is also related to glassing, which is the S2 glass that I used for this build. It's supposed to be a lot stronger than E-glass, but to be honest, I can't say I've noticed a difference with it. It's strong, but not sure I would have, spring for it again since it does cost more. But, good old E-glass is great and it's been around forever. If I do make another longboard, I probably would use Volan glass, which is what I've used in a previous longboard build. That glass has a really cool weave in it, and it's the weave in it's fairly strong. Also, the glassing schedule of 6 on the bottom and double 6-ounce on the deck is plenty strong. So far, I've had no issues with heel dents or anything like that, no dings. But generally speaking, I glass my boards a little bit heavier, except for my performance shortboard. and also a fish that I made, which I'll talk about later. I guess I did put one little nick up here, right here actually, up here on the nose of the board, when I smacked the board into a door jamb, the one behind the camera here, while taking this board in and out. That's basically where all the damage seems to happen when you're transporting a surfboard. It's usually around door jambs for some reason. And the first ding is always the most painful, but the board's holding up great. All right, let's talk about how this board rides. Now, first thing, riding a longboard took me a minute to get used to again, since I'm used to riding boards that are a lot shorter. Being at 10 feet 8 inches, this thing is quite long. So what I was finding, I was a little bit too far forward. It feels kind of weird to have so much board in front of me. I always think that I should be up further on the board. But yeah, I came close to nosediving a few times. Actually, I might have nosedived a few times. But anyways, after a few waves, I found my positioning. I had to be further back on it. So I basically have probably this much board in front of me. Anyways, now, this board rides awesome. It's freaking sweet. Something I came to, though, is a realization is a board actually needs to be able to fit into the wave in order to do any type of maneuvers. Now, that sounds silly, and it's pretty much common sense if you've ridden boards for any amount of time, and I knew that, but it wasn't until I had the board out in smaller surf that it really clicked in for me, because most of my boards, I can actually fit in even the tiniest waves and do some small maneuvers. But, at almost 10 feet long, this is a wave catching machine, even on the smallest waves or the meekest waves, but it really doesn't fit in the pocket of the wave in order to ride it like a performance board, like that I kind of intended this to be. So it's more about what waves I can take this in and when I should take it out. Whereas I'm used to performing little maneuvers with any of my shorter boards. Performance-wise, this board rides freaking awesome. For the few times that I had it out in some actual ground swell with longer wave periods, but for the most part, I've only had this out in a ton of wind swell. But I do have some footage of the first few times I took this board out, and it is a blast to ride and paddle into the waves. The little extra rocker I put into the nose is really nice for when I would need to drop in on a steeper wave, although on a board this long, hopefully you're not doing that very often. This board flies when paddling. Like, the hull speed on this is so much faster than any of my other boards. The width is perfect. I don't think I would want it any wider than this. I forget what this is. I think it's close to 20 inches, or it is 20 inches. As it would start becoming probably a little bit too tippy in my opinion. Now, I did have this board out for some really sweet rides when a hurricane passed by in the Atlantic a few weeks ago. But I didn't take my GoPro out with me, and I don't always take my camera out because I end up fussing with it and obsessing about trying to get the perfect shot and good clips, and it really takes away from my surf session. So I tend to avoid taking it out. Now, the 3D printed fins I tested on this board work for the most part fine, but they get damaged a bit too easily. I haven't gone back to trying to print them out stronger. I was going to do it in PETG instead of PLA. So what happened was, right before I was about to go in for a surf session, when the swell was really looking great and a decent size, I actually snapped off the fins when I placed the board down in the sand, and a wave caught it and just snapped off the fins, as you can see here. All I was left with was this little kind of short nub on the middle fin. Now, I still was able to surf the board. I took it out and I could turn with it pretty hard actually. So that, the rails and the way the tail is shaped and the finner rails and just how the combination of the board and everything I've kind of designed into it, it seems to be performing as intended, even though the 2+1 fins were broken. Speaking of the 2+1 fin setup, I think it's been working great. I ended up purchasing a proper fiberglass green fin that I really like, but I might reshape it so that it has a little bit less rake. I find there's too much. I want to be able to pivot the board more than I want it to, say, hold in surf for like nose riding. And also, speaking of nose riding, I'm not an expert rider by any means, but I have been able to hang 5 off the nose of this board, so that was kind of cool. Overall, for performance and fun factor, this board is freaking awesome. For something this long, and you know, it really does perform the way I intended it to. For storage, this board is, well, hard to store. It doesn't fit in my board rack, so I bought a kayak and bike storage rack, and now it's found a nice little home high in the ceiling. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, I am testing out a new surf grip on this board that I got off AliExpress. So far, I am loving it. It works so good. They're a little bit bigger than, say, the Vanderwall, I don't know, hex traction type stuff, and I think like the hex traction that there's some other types out there I see on the internet. Anyway, and what I like about this grip is that it's grippier than any of the other alternative grips that I've tried, and it doesn't tear you up. It seems to hold really well. It's sticky. I have no problem sliding around on it. So expect a review at the end of the season, or maybe around winter time once I get a good chance to really test this out. Although I've had this out both on this and another board, and so far I love it. Well, that's it for this video, guys. I'm gonna nickname this surfboard the Freighter, for the sheer reason that it's so unwieldy to carry around, and well, the name kind of sounds cool as well, although freighters aren't performance oriented, but whatever. I also have a future build video of this surfboard here. It's gonna be more of a vlog style video where I build out this fish surfboard. Now, I put a rush build on this, so I didn't film much of it as I wanted to get it finished for this summer surf season, because when the waves are a little bit meeker and mushier. So expect that, that's coming soon. Other future videos, I have some ideas for my next build. I know I mentioned that I was going to maybe work on a foil board, but I've kind of changed my mind, and I think I'm going to put that on hold as I want to work on another shorter, maybe mid-length board, a little bit thinner, but I also want to experiment with doing some cloth inlays on that. So that will be really cool. So look forward to that. Anyways, thanks so much for joining me on this journey. It has been a blast. It's been a lot of fun. I love having a longboard again in my quiver for those really rolling fat waves. And I also love sharing what I make on this channel with you guys. So this video series has been a really great, enjoyable series. I'm very, very happy for all the people that took the time to leave a comment, thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. It really helps me out, really helps out the channel, and helps me make more content. So give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't, click on the bell icon so you get notified when I post more videos, and I will see you guys in the next video or video series. And I will leave you guys with some gratuitous surf footage of me riding this board not very well.